All right, and you should have just gotten a notice this meeting is being recorded. If you don't want to be seen, you can always turn your video off and you can mute yourself as well. All right, so let's get started. My name is Dana Lewinter. I am the Director of Municipal Engagement here at CHAPA. And I want to welcome you all to our third regional meeting this week. This time here in the North Shore and Merrimack Valley. I assume many of you are in that region based on joining us today. So thank you so much for being here. I'm going to share my screen here so that you all can see what we're doing. Can I get a couple head nods if you can see my screen now? Great. Okay, so we're off and running. So again, welcome on behalf of all of CHAPA. Rachel Heller, our CEO, sends her regards. She was unable to be here because of a conflicting meeting, but we really value these regional meetings. We've been doing them for several years now. It's a great time for us to tell you a little bit about what we're doing, but more importantly, hear from folks in the region and our partners about what's important to them. So, okay, so for those of you who are not familiar with CHAPA, here's just a little bit about us. Obviously, our mission is to encourage the production and preservation of housing affordable to low and moderate income families. We work on building sustainable and diverse communities. And we have a lot of different programs and policies and activities that we do to achieve that. Please check out our website if you haven't after this meeting. I promise we will share all of the slides. And we're also going to be sharing the recording of this, so please don't feel like you have to take copious notes. We'll also be sharing some notes from the chat. But once folks start sharing stuff in the chat function, quick tip, if you click on the three little buttons next to where it says file at the bottom of the chat function, you can save the chat as well. So some of my colleagues at CHAPA are going to be sharing a lot of different resources. That's a great way to keep all of those in check as you go along. I want to thank our regional meeting sponsor, Bank of America, for making this possible. Without them, we really couldn't do this work. So thank you very much to them. And also thank you to our local participating co-hosts. I was just saying to all of them that this is the largest group of co-hosts, which shows that the North Shore Merrimack Valley is a very engaged community. We value the input from all of them, and we're going to hear from these co-hosts in just a minute. But before we get started, Whitney Demetrius from the Municipal Engagement Initiative is going to help us with a poll. And while you're doing the poll, if you could just put in the chat your name and the organization that you're with, so we all know who is here with us today. So Whitney, go for it.
All right, and I'll just look for some head nods to indicate that everyone can see that. Great, and there's just a few questions. Don't overly concern yourself. You're not being quizzed in that way, but we're hoping that these questions can sort of introduce us and guide us through our conversation today. Okay, it seems like most of us are at least halfway there. Looking to Dana to see if I should call it.
Yeah, give folks maybe another couple, 20 seconds, get in your last answers. There's no wrong answer. Well, there are wrong answers, but you're not being graded.
Right, exactly.
It's a learning experience, so please,
For sure.
no pressure, please.
All right, great. So I'm going to end the poll now, and then I will share the results so that folks can see that. Looking for head nods to see that you can see that as well. Okay, great. So who's represented here? I'm glad to see that many of you all are local community organizers. We have municipal folks and statewide organizations and others, and we are excited to have you guys all engaged in what we hope to be really a listening session. The second question is, according to the American List, what percentage of American renter households were unable to make housing payments in May of 2020? That was, in fact, 22%. The third question, going down, what percentage of homeowners then were unable to make their housing payments in May of 2020? That answer is also 22%. 22%. According to the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, impacts of COVID-19 pandemic on New England homeowners and renters, how many New England households are at risk of missing their rent or mortgage payment due to coronavirus-related job loss? That answer is actually more than 1 million households. Majority of you all got that correct. It's really astounding, and we hope to share many of these resources with you guys as well in terms of these reports so that it can also guide some of the conversations you're having locally. The next question from that same report talks about the best case scenario. How much lost housing payments is likely to accrue in New England from April to July? That answer was $1.42 billion. Majority of you all had that correct. In the billions, really remarkable. The next question refers to the MAPC update to the COVID-19 layoff housing gap report. And it talks about just these three occupations: food preparation and serving, office and administrative support, and sales. What percentage? That was, in fact, 40%. 40%, just those three occupation fields. And then, have you been to one of our CHAPA meetings before? The majority of you all have, and so we're glad to have you back engaged in these conversations. And for the other 35%, we're excited to have you as part of this. Really do see this as an opportunity area in terms of not being able to physically come together. You can probably hear my little one here in the background. But as much as I really would love to get out of this house to be with you all, we are glad to have you guys together with us virtually. So I'll hand it back over to Dana.
Great, thank you so much. And I hope that is interesting information. If you got it wrong, it's a learning process, like I said. But Whitney is going to be sharing all of the links to those reports in the chat, and we'll also dig into them a little bit more in this session. So I'm going to just walk you through our agenda real quickly. First, we're going to hear from our partner organizations, and we have many of them on the phone here today. Then we're going to hear a policy update, both a state and federal update from our policy team at CHAPA. We'll hear a little bit about our municipal engagement initiative and how you can get in touch with Whitney and I to do that work. And then we'll do some regional sharing about the things that you're all facing and have breakout discussions. So we will be going into breakout rooms. Please stick with us for the full hour and a half, because that's when we really want to hear from you what challenges you're facing and the strategies that you're employing and the gaps that you're seeing. So before we go any further, I do want to hear from our partner organizations. And so I can see most of them on my screen. I'm going to just go in the order that I can see them here. So first up, we'll hear from Jeff Whedon. He's from LHAN, the Lynn Housing Authority and Neighborhood Development, and also part of our Lynn Housing Coalition Municipal Engagement Initiative. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you very much. So I do want to stress that the Lynn Housing Authority, with all the COVID pandemic happening, is we really turned our focus to our Regional Family Success Center. And that's been really what we've been working on. Some of the numbers with the Family Success Center, we received over 1,000 applications for assistance with rent and mortgage arrears in the past 3 months since the pandemic began. This is about 2.5 times the amount of applicants that we normally receive. We do expect that to be an even greater increase when the moratorium has ended. By the end of the month, we will have processed approximately 250,000 in specific COVID raft response funds, as well as approximately 200,000 with existing traditional raft funds during these months. This is the full amount of the raft funding that we received, and there is certainly a much larger number of applicants that are eligible that we are not able to assist with additional funding at this time. We also have about 25,000 ESG funds currently in process, some of which is in relation to the evictions that were started prior to the pandemic. Moving forward, we'll be applying for more homeless prevention and rapid rehousing ESG dollars through DHCD to use throughout the North Shore region, and utilizing our youth and young adult homeless grant through the Executive Office of Human Health and Human Services to focus on the 18 and the 24-year-old population that are experiencing homelessness and housing instability throughout Essex County. This funding includes a college pilot program where there are 5 slots available for homeless students at North Shore Community College and Salem State to be housed at dorms at Salem State. The room and board will be provided by the state, and case management services provided by our case management manager. And then looking forward, as we prepare for the end of the eviction moratorium, to utilize the ESG funds to target those that are most in danger of becoming homeless and assisting with short and medium-term rental assistance for these clients, as well as incorporating ESG eligible activities through our partnership, such as legal services, including landlord mediation, at-risk homelessness, and housing search and placement for those that meet HUD definition of literally homeless. So we're doing a lot of work trying to get those federal dollars out the door. That's our main focus now. We are also working on a housing production plan throughout the city. This is a first for the city of Lynn. This is something we've been ongoing for over a year now. We've engaged MAPC to help with that work. We talked with our steering committee to see if, when the pandemic first hit, if this is something that we should still be doing because there's so much focus elsewhere. And everyone thought that yes, housing is still at the forefront more than ever. So we decided to keep this momentum going with the housing production plan. And of course, the MEI initiative goes hand in hand with the housing production plan. So we're happy to keep that momentum going, both with the housing production plan of MAPC and the MEI initiative here with CHAPA. So we've had multiple Zoom meetings, and we're excited that work can be done as well. So that is my update for the Lynn Housing Authority.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I really appreciate it. And it's been really exciting to work with you guys in Lynn. So much going on there. So next we're going to go to Andrew DeFranza from Harbor Light Community Partners. Andrew.
Everybody, nice to be here and to be with all of you and to follow Jeff. A little bit of a heads up here on what we're up to. Folks may know us. Harbor Light Community Partners is a community development corporation north of Boston, headquartered out of Beverly. And we're involved in about 10 or 11 of the communities within that 20 community footprint. And we have a number of quick bullets of things on our mind that we've been working on during this time, which we really view as bordered by the COVID situation and the larger, wider, really important equity questions following that. So first for us, we have a lot of elderly and special needs housing. And so we've been spending a very significant amount of time. I think my colleague Rosa Ordaz is on the line, who's been involved with a lot of those efforts to retool our management and service operations to try to protect as many of those residents as possible. That's included retooling maintenance protocols, property management, access protocols, different kinds of hygiene and cleaning protocols. And that has taken a huge amount of energy and time over the last few months. And so far, we're really grateful that people are well, though we are seeing now some inadvertent or additional challenges around questions of mental health and neurological conditions, especially in the elderly populations, as they struggle and suffer from the isolation that was important to preserve their physical health. So that's a frustrating and difficult reality, but that's what we're seeing. So we've been involved heavily in that over the last few months. We continue to be involved in construction on a couple of small projects we've been working on, a first-time homebuyer unit in Gloucester and a very small community scale 6-unit rental building in Beverly. Both of those have continued apace and are now available for applications. If folks are interested, they could contact us. So we're really excited about those, particularly the Beverly project is a small one, as I said, but it's very close to the train. And all of the units have project-based vouchers, which is pretty rare. So we're excited about that and looking forward to occupancy this fall. We continue to move forward our 3 or 4 projects that are in the permitting and funding process. The main one is we're serving as a consultant for the YMCA in Beverly at the Cabot Y to try to get that project closed and under renovation. So unique challenges there around relocation of existing tenants during COVID, and have figured that out. And hopefully they'll be closed and into construction late summer, early fall. We've also continue to be involved in reflecting on the questions of zoning and permitting and equity on the North Shore, as we've been interested in and speaking about for quite some time. So questions about how permitting can get done, how zoning is sitting, how new zoning opportunities like the ADU ordinance in Salem and others, how they're coming down and how they impact or speak to questions of racial and economic segregation in our region, which is profound, both by municipality and then sometimes within municipality. And so we are thinking about what to be saying and doing about that, and where to be advocating for what kind of zoning and other public policy mechanisms to address that. And then finally, we're grateful so far that on the rental side, it's been a challenge in some places, but mostly that's been okay. Huge shout out to Jeff and the Elhan crew, who have been really critical on the rafts side and have helped quite a number of our residents stay current. We're a little anxious to see how the late summer, early fall goes, if there's a second spike and post-stimulus, but so far that's been going well, and we're really grateful to Elhan. So thanks for having us, and we look forward to hearing what everybody has to say.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts. So next we're going to go to Jess Andors from Lawrence Community Works.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dana. So I am kind of charged with sharing. There's a group of nonprofits in Lawrence that have come together starting back with the gas disaster a couple of years ago. We reconvened around the COVID response, and there's a subgroup of us who've been working on housing and financial stability issues that includes, it includes a whole number of people. I'll just mention a few. It's LCW, ACT Lawrence, Habitat for Humanity, the YMCA, GLCAC, and others that I am missing, but we've all been trying to work together on these issues. And so some of the big things that we're seeing in the Merrimack Valley, clearly there's a huge caseload of people that need rental assistance. There's a ton of our folks who've lost employment and are having trouble paying the bills and are, in spite of the eviction moratorium, clearly want to keep up with their rent payments. LCW alone has over 1,100 people on a list of folks that we've reached out to, and the vast majority of them need rental assistance. Many of them don't qualify for RAFT or other resources that are available. We've been able to distribute a little over $100,000 in emergency assistance, much of that for rent and some of that for food to people. And then some of our other partners have also been able to distribute other amounts in similar ranges, and the United Way has been extremely supportive of that and financially supportive as well. So that's been a big help. But we are very concerned about what happens when the moratorium ends. If the economy doesn't pick up, we think we're going to be facing a wave of evictions. And in addition to that, we have many, many undocumented families, many hardworking undocumented families who are not necessarily being protected by the eviction moratorium and still facing eviction or harassment or rent increases during this time. They might be subletting from other people and in precarious situations. And in Lawrence, there's a huge housing crunch, but it tends to be less about gentrification and more about extremely intensive rental demand. So we have been thinking about a variety of policy issues that we could get our collective will and voice behind. And that includes statewide taking up the conversation around rent regulation in the state. It includes expanding RAFT and similar resources to help people. It includes perhaps requiring financial literacy and coaching as a supplement to RAFT assistance and to other kinds of rental assistance, so that we can make sure that we're not just helping people solve a problem for themselves in the short term, but helping them in the long term. And also increasing legal aid capacity to support tenants at risk of eviction, and to solve a host of complicated issues around people's housing records and access as well. So those are some of the things that we've been concerned about and pushing and working on as a group. Just a very small sort of more organizational update. We just heard from DHCD that we got funded on the first phase of what will eventually be a 2-phase 80-unit housing development, all completely affordable to families between 30 and 60% of area median income. So we're very excited about that. And we're trying to move forward other things to add to production as well. There's more, but I'll stop there because our time is limited.
Thank you so much. And yes, congrats. That's wonderful, wonderful news. I really am happy to hear that. And also thanks for the rest of your remarks, Jess. So next we're going to go to Karen Frederick from Community Teamwork. Karen, go ahead.
Karen, you're muted.
Karen, can you unmute yourself?
You know, as many of these as you do, we still forget to unmute. So
it makes the rest of us feel better when someone else does it too. So thank you.
I'll take one for the team.
Okay.
For those of you who don't know us, Community Teamwork is a community action agency, a regional housing agency, a CDC, and through our subsidiary Common Ground, we do housing development. And as for most of you, this has been the most challenging time I've worked through, I would say, in my career. And that's a long time. So it started with our homeless population. We had to immediately depopulate some of our shelters, congregates, put on over 20 units of housing, and finding 20 apartments that we could rent in the middle of a pandemic was challenging. So I think that's where we started. We do our services in a holistic way. We run a lot of traditional federal programming as a community action agency, like WIC and fuel assistance and Section 8 housing. All of those programs immediately went remote and very successfully. They're growing. We added more clients to WIC, more clients to fuel assistance, and we were able to continue paying our Section 8 landlords in the 70 communities that we work in very effectively. And I am forever grateful to IT for the work. They had us well set up to do that. So in the first two things we saw in the community was the food need that hit fast and hard. We distributed tens of thousands of dollars of food gift cards, and then we started partnering with our school department and delivering food to our shelters, to homeless families, to seniors who couldn't get to food sites. That was a real challenge as the number of cases was going up. We really had people who couldn't get out, and we didn't want to get out, or were quarantining, or were sick. So that we were delivering about 850 meals a day to people using our Head Start school buses. So we really took all of our resources and remanned them as fast as we could and rewomaned them to be as flexible as possible. Because of our the way we do our services, our resource center and our housing consumer education center immediately became the focus of our response. So people were getting gift cards and working through our resource center, which stays staffed as in person, as did our shelters and some of our other programming. But for the most part, we went to remote work. Our housing, of course, as a provider of RAFT in the region, it just went through the roof. We were receiving about 150 applications a week. They just keep coming in, and I really want to thank the partners we're working with in Lawrence, in Haverhill, and I know Jess has been a partner with us, as well as Greater Lawrence Community Action Council and Community Action in Haverhill, to get the applications out as quickly and as efficiently as we could, because we really wanted to keep people whole and not have to fall behind during the pandemic. So in a period of 7 weeks, we had some additional COVID raft money. I'd say in 7 weeks, we distributed about $1 million. We distributed about 1.3 million in Lawrence, about 1.7 million in the Lowell area. And I don't have the Haverhill and Northern numbers because I just can no longer remember data without having it written down. But that's been a real focus about managing different pots of housing assistance money and money that can also go to mortgages, and really trying to immediately ramp that up. We brought in staff from other parts of the agency and trained them up so that we could effectively and efficiently deliver these services remotely, but get them to people and to make sure as many people as we could stay stably housed. So that's been a huge focus. We're now working through about 400 applications that we still have in-house and really trying to get those addressed. We're looking at various other money coming in. The IRMA program we'll be launching, which is new dollars, CDBG money that will be for rental assistance, and really trying to make it manageable and understandable so that we can use the best resource in the best way, and it can go as far as it can. So we really, truly appreciate all our partners in this work. It's been a challenge, and it's been, I'd have to say, the fact that we do work well together and we have forums like this to talk about it and help coordinate it makes a huge difference. And we really look forward to continuing to work with folks in the region to make sure that our money goes out quickly and efficiently and really gets to the people who need it.
Thank you so much, Karen. Some of those numbers are really staggering. So I appreciate you sharing the kind of the scope of what you guys are facing and who you're trying to serve and who still needs to be served. So next we're going to go to Jim Weil from the Merrimack Valley Housing Partnership. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Dana. Thanks, hello, everyone. We've had here at the Housing Partnership, we focus solely really on home ownership. And so we do comprehensive training to English, Spanish, and Khmer speaking populations. And so we have had actually a really positive experience through this whole thing, unlike a lot of what you guys have experienced, because we've completely recalibrated our operation to Zoom classes, and we've had record numbers of people going through the classes. We have 60 people finishing the class tonight, and we just did one a week ago. And we've got that many signed up for when it starts in a couple of weeks. So it's been really a lot more home buyers. And the interesting thing about, we've all become Zoom experts, but the thing that's really been interesting about it and really fun is the classes are more interactive in ways, because there's 3 of us that manage each class, and one's talking and 2 people are managing the chat rooms and handling the questions, and there's a lot more interactive communication. A lot more people ask questions when you can do it in a chat box rather than asking it in front of classrooms. So there's a lot of learning happening, which is really exciting to watch. So, and then, but in general, the market for first-time home buyers is as tough as ever. I mean, there's been so little inventory that the pressure for raising prices is never ending. And so a lot of people are having a hard time, finding properties, and the affordability was a big problem before, and it's really being exacerbated now. So, and the banks have been busy with a lot of refi business, but so I have so much empathy for what everybody else is dealing with, which are much more acute needs than the people that we're serving. But we have had a really positive experience during this time. So thanks.
Thank you, Jim. And I think it's worth noting that you guys do your programs in multiple languages and really try to make them accessible. And so we're glad that a lot of people are accessing, as people have time at home, to do those programs. So thank you. So lastly, our last community partner who's on the call today, we've got from the North Shore CDC, Mickey Northcutt. Mickey, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah, more of the same along with what others have been talking about. I think on the affordable housing side, we haven't really slowed down or missed anything. We've been very fortunate. We started construction on a new housing development in Gloucester in the first week of the year. And we're about a week delayed or so, but we're, thrilled to construction never stopped. And so far, so good. We're obviously monitoring that really closely. But that'll be finished next May, it's looking like. So it'll be nice to have some new housing units coming online despite everything else. And also the week before everything sort of came to fruition with the quarantine, we had started a permitting process to create 62 apartments in Salem, 44 affordable, and 18, I'm trying to get those numbers correct, 18 market rate. And we went through that permitting process between March and ultimately got the permits granted by Salem's Planning Board in late May. So that was exciting and cool. It's great that they've been willing to continue all of the municipal boards. And honestly, engagement in these meetings has been increased, not decreased. We know not everyone can participate in remote calls, which is an issue, but there's been certainly no drop off in those processes. And we're planning another permitting process, probably still figuring it out, but probably for the fall. Also, our community engagement team has also obviously refocused their energies to support the most vulnerable residents that we not only live in our housing, but also who participate in our other programs like ESL classes. And we have one of our developments is a youth homeless development, and formerly youth homeless development, I should say. And just folks that are particularly vulnerable. So we've done about 600 wellness checks, and also, like I think Jess was saying, we've been very fortunate with both United Way and Essex County Community Foundation to be able to tap into some cash assistance resources. And I think the number is between the two and a couple of other smaller ones, we've gotten about $70,000 out the door to folks who have gone to essentially zero income overnight. We also had some small business oriented grants that we repurposed to be more that we could get out the door really quickly and sort of meet the times, and shifted from some other kind of programs that we essentially put on ice until this is over. But those I'll share. One was we put together care packages for folks. Our community engagement team designated, kind of triaged who we felt was most in need based on a variety of factors. And we put together care packages that were all local products and included some local gift certificates to like neighborhood-based restaurants and bodegas that are still open but struggling and trying to survive. And I think in all cases, nobody had gift certificates. So we went through the process of like figuring out how to do a neighborhood passport gift certificate program. And so people be able to get a lot of meals out of those. So we've gotten 3 blasts of funding for that. And then finally, we did a call for artists for 25 local, like we define North Shore broadly as local artists to do sort of relevant to the times public art, primarily posters that are educational and a public health lens, because we found the feedback we got from our community engagement team is that a lot of folks on those wellness checks weren't accessing media to the degree that many of us are, and there was a gap in really in basic public health awareness. So that we're actually receiving all of the 25 pieces of art tomorrow, and we'll be announcing winners in I think the second week of July. And we're happy to share those. We think some of those might be, you know, relevant in other communities besides the Point in Salem, and we'd be happy to share. And they're going to be, I've seen some previews, really great art. And then I think we're going to do another call for art a little bit later in the summer to, again, bring on 25 local artists to do, larger scale walls in the Point. Because we want to try to, and we know artists are one of the many groups that are particularly suffering. So we're trying to get that money identified and raised, and then back out the door as soon as possible. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Mickey. I'm so excited to see that art. Having been on the tour of all the art in the Point, I can't wait to see what you guys come up with. So I'm going to reshare. Thank you all to all of our community partners, both for sharing your experience and also for the incredible work that you're all doing in this moment to support the community on the North Shore and Merrimack Valley. And we're learning a lot from you. I'm going to reshare my screen. Give me just 1 second. And I'm going to hand it off to Abidnia Curve from our policy team, who's going to talk to us about some state policy updates. So Abid, go for it.
Thank you, Dana. I'm Abidnia Curve. I go by Abi. I am the policy associate and work with our public policy team at CHAPA. And just to give a background, as we got into the whole COVID situation, we have had to recalculate some of our priorities to ensure that we are working on things that are very relevant for COVID response and the recovery going forward. And so in that sense, we have been advocating for resources and policies to support not just renters, but homeowners and landlords, and preserve and expand the state's affordable housing stock to make sure everybody in Commonwealth has safe and healthy home, and also ensure that we are advocating for equitable policies that works for everyone. Next slide. So in terms of our priorities, there's a lot to work on. We know, as many of our speakers talked about, as the eviction moratorium comes to an end or even near to it, we do expect there to be a large wave of evictions due to unpaid rent. And so we are trying to advocate for an expansion of RAFT program, as Karen and Jessica pointed out, that the need for RAFT is really spiking. And we are trying to advocate for expansion of RAFT, or rather a $50 million appropriation for RAFT at this time, and also increase the cap, which is currently at $4,000 in assistance, to $10,000, because as people are going to be accruing more than a couple of months of back rent, $4,000 may not be enough, especially towards the end of the moratorium. And expanding the access beyond 50% AMI, which it is currently at, to 80% AMI, and at the same time advocating for $6.25 million for the HCECs, which are sort of the frontline agencies taking these RAFT applications and helping people get housing assistance. And so that is one of our focus priorities, to ensure that there is rental assistance, which not just stabilizes renters, but also makes sure that small property owners are able to pay their mortgages and get that rent from tenants, and the housing ecosystem is stabilized during this whole crisis period. At the same time, as we are looking at getting more funds for programs like RAFT, we are looking at what, other than state revenues, which are already falling, that we can look at, and the federal funds that are coming in are a large part of it. And if we are able to leverage those and make sure they are diverted into programs that are really in need, that is something that will be really great in terms of getting those resources that we need. At the same time, we are working on a pilot legislation, right to counsel. There was already a bill filed before the COVID crisis, but right now the right to counsel bill is a pilot program that is being worked on, because as the moratorium ends, this is also sort of one of the measures that will help preserve tenancies, to provide full legal representation in eviction proceedings for tenants and owner occupants at a certain level of income, and making sure that they have a counsel available so that they can sort of maintain at least a part of their tenancies. At the same time as we are working on all these priorities, we are not letting our eye off the housing choice legislation that we had been advocating for before, to bring down the threshold from supermajority to simple majority in town meetings for certain zoning changes. And as people are becoming more aware of the whole racial inequities and trying to, find ways to act on it, this is one of the ways. Housing justice is also a part of racial justice, and ensuring that people have access in, many communities for affordable housing, and making sure we are supporting, we are enabling more upzoning measures. That is what Housing Choice is doing, and this is where we are trying to bring forth the legislation in today's context, and try and push it forward even in these times. But definitely our focus has been raft and right to counsel and those things, and leveraging federal funds. In terms of our budget priorities, the governor has filed supplemental budget. There is some pot of money there for public housing authorities, for homeless shelters. What we are also trying to do is ensure that there are so many different pots of money. There is FEMA funds through the supplemental budget. There is ESG funds. How can we make sure they are coordinated in a better way, so that, for example, ESG can more be diverted towards rapid rehousing, and the FEMA money can be used for shelters. So that is sort of, some of those things we are thinking through. We have been working on a letter to the administration and the legislature on better use of ESG funds. If you guys are interested, please reach out to us, and we would be happy to take your input in terms of making sure we are we are able to do a better advocacy on the ESG funds, but not just that, even other funds, and I'll let Ryan talk about that. But also we are trying to push forward, make sure that our programs like MRVP and which provide rental vouchers are adequately funded in FY 2021, because everything going on, we want to make sure that there is no funding cuts to these programs, because they also help people stay in affordable housing and have access to housing. So we are making sure that we have, we're trying to advocate for these programs and funding for these programs, and at the same time ensuring that people have enough support through permanent supportive housing for people with different needs who are experiencing homelessness. It's very important, especially at this point in such a public health crisis, that people have access to housing. And one of the things that has been helpful is that this crisis has really highlighted that housing is health, and we are sort of trying to leverage that and make sure that we are pushing forward for these policies and fundings that will help us move people towards stable housing. So those are some of the things that we have been doing. There's a lot more going on, and I would really encourage all of you to sort of plug into our different channels at CHAPA to give your input, so we can advocate for these policies in a better way. And with that, I'll pass it on to Ryan to talk about other priorities.
Thank you, B. So as mentioned, I'm Ryan Dominguez, Policy Analyst at CHAPA. And as part of my job function, I also help to coordinate the New England Housing Network, which includes a number of affordable housing organizations in each of the New England states. And together as a network, we've been advocating down in DC during the whole COVID-19 pandemic for a number of different housing and homelessness kind of resources to be included in both the CARES Act, as well as the HEROES Act that came out of the House. And we're going to continue to fight for a lot of those additional resources in any kind of additional funding package that comes out of the federal government. Outside of that, we've also been focused on a lot of advocacy with some of the federal agencies down in DC, including the Treasury and HUD, to really try to get some additional kind of regulatory waiver flexibilities for some of the programs that were already funded through the CARES Act. And then that has been very successful, and we've moved our attention now more to what we can do now in Massachusetts. So we've turned our attention to the funds that have already been allocated through the CARES Act, and we focused on three sources of funding. The first is the Coronavirus Relief Fund, or CRF. The second is the Community Development Block Grants, or CDBG. And lastly, we focused on the Emergency Solution Grants, or ESG. The Coronavirus Relief Fund is probably the largest pool of money that Massachusetts has received from the CARES Act. In total, they received around $2.7 billion for their CRF. And approximately 25% of that, or 502 million, has already been given directly to cities and towns across the Commonwealth. To give you a little bit of background and kind of a local flavor, Lynn received around $8.3 million in its CRF. Lawrence received around $7 million, and Haverhill has received around $5.6 million. And across the state or across the country, states have used the CRF for things like emergency rental assistance, as well as helping to fund things like PPE and other needs that different cities and towns might need in their respective states. At CHAPA, we're going to be focused on the other 75% of the $2.7 billion that Massachusetts has received. And we're putting together a proposal that includes $100 million for rental assistance, $6 million for a right to counsel pilot program, as well as other costs, including senior housing operating costs. And, as we go into some of our breakout sessions, I would love to hear a little bit more about, some other funding sources that we might want to advocate for or prioritize kind of moving forward. Moving on, I also mentioned the CDBG block grants, and the CDBG block grants can be used for 3 months of rental assistance, as well as funding housing counseling programs. And in total, Massachusetts has received around $86.8 million for CDBG, and around $40 million of that total went directly to entitlement communities. To highlight some of your municipalities, Lynn received around $1.4 million, Lawrence received around $1 million, and Haverhill has received around $610,000. Lastly, there's the ESG program that could be used for paying for shelter costs as well as rapid rehousing. And in total, the Commonwealth received around $104 million for ESG, and close to $60 million of that total went to entitlement communities. Again, just to give you a little bit of the local funding, so Lynn received around $4.75 million for ESG, and Lawrence received around $1.7 million. In the chat, I will include 2 documents that kind of outline all of the different funding mechanisms that went to the different cities and towns. And before I kick it back to B to kind of talk about what you can do now, I'll just say from the federal perspective, there's been a lot of federal dollars that have gone to cities and towns across the Commonwealth. And as local advocates, I think it would be very helpful for you to try to get involved in some of those conversations about where that funding is going to be allocated. So I would really suggest that you reach out to your local kind of municipal officials and ask them to have a public process or a public comment period, or even just kind of a meeting with you to discuss some of the things you would like to see these funding mechanisms prioritized for. So with that, I will kick it back to B.
Thanks, Ryan. And as Ryan pointed out, there is a lot of money that is flowing into the communities, local communities. And one of the things that we have been doing is also encouraging communities to sort of reach out to their municipal officials and decision makers and ask them to, just be transparent or be engaged in the process on how those funds are being distributed, because they are really critical resources that can be used for rental assistance and mortgage assistance as well. And so in terms of what you can do now, on the state level, you can reach out to your state legislator and ask for expansion of RAFT with $6 million for HCECs, because that is really a very, very critical item in order to stabilize the whole housing ecosystem at this point. On the local level, as I said, you can contact your municipal officials. I'll be sharing certain links. We have a letter, a sample letter that you can use, a template letter, to reach out to your local officials and ask them to be engaged in the process and just have some sort of a public input, so that we can have some say in terms of which programs can be really helped with these federal funds coming in. We also have a lot of materials on draft advocacy, on a letter that you can send out to your legislators, and a webinar that we had which shared a lot of materials, and I'll be posting all of those links in a while. On the local level, as I said, you can reach out to municipal officials, and in terms of what you can do to raise your voice, we would encourage you to join CHAPA committees. We have a lot of committees that have discussions pertaining to resources on the state level, on the federal level, and also around homelessness prevention, on public housing and rental assistance. And it would be great if you are able to join those committees, which are now hosting meetings virtually at this point. So it would be really great if you can give us your input and we can better our advocacy and sort of do it collectively together, which is a more effective outcome. So I will share many of the links, and please feel free to reach out to me or any of our CHAPA people for any more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhi and Ryan. I really appreciate it. And if you're following along in the chat, there's a lot of links and information there. Most of those you can find on our website as well. So just take a look at those and please use all of those resources. Going to hand it over to Whitney. We're getting very close to our breakout session. So just a couple more things to help you have your conversations. I'm going to hand it over to Whitney Demetrius to tell you a little bit more about our municipal engagement initiative. So Whitney, go ahead.
Okay, great, thank you. And I'll try to fly through this so that we can really spend most of our time listening and hearing from you all. So the Municipal Engagement Initiative started back in 2018, actually, the idea that building support for affordable housing production in communities across the Commonwealth is so important, and we know that local support really makes or breaks new housing development from happening. So the idea was to put together a local strategy to bring community members together so that folks are not so much doing much of this work in silos, but doing it more in a collaborative effort, supporting really each community to build culture that welcomes housing, including affordable housing, bolstering efforts to expand housing opportunities in these communities, and growing the number of people supporting housing production in each community. And so we're aware of the fact that many of you all on our call are part of our groups, because we are now in 9 communities. Those include Arlington, Amherst, Acton, Medford, Essex, Newton, Foxborough, Revere, and Lynn, and as well as our 2 MEI-like communities, Agawam and Brookline. Each of those communities are all very different, and they're all so unique, and so our approach to much of that work is unique as well. So where do you go from here? Folks may be really leaning into this moment right now where we're looking at our society in terms of a health crisis, but certainly a housing crisis, an economic crisis, and for sure a social crisis, right, as it relates to social inequities, racial inequities, right? So you're thinking about what you can do. We sort of map this out in our MEI Light Toolkit, which you can find on our website. But really the idea is to identify who those core people are in your community, to start to begin to have these conversations. Think about who those partners are. Think outside the box about who those folks are to come into the conversation. So not just housing folks, but also the churches, the environmentalist groups, the schools, etc. Begin having those conversations. Use the data, which we'll talk about a little bit more later, to kind of drive much of your conversations and launch the event. Just get started, get going. And so what we've done in our toolkit was give you a series of strategies, an outline agenda, a list of key stakeholders just to begin thinking about, to reach out to. And so we do advise you to go to those to that site to start to think about how you can do this on a local level in your community. And again, we're happy to talk with you guys if you have particular questions about how to get started. And for sure, we can direct you to some of our groups as well, who are on this call for sure, to talk about what some of the opportunities might be, what things they were able to do, op-eds, educational forums, fact sheets, etc., all related to housing and all of this work. So we thank you all. I really want to just hand it over to Dana to kind of talk about the data, because I'd love for us to kind of get started with the conversation. But again, please do reach out to us if you're interested, because you can also tell us where you live on our website so that we can connect you to neighbors in your local community who are also interested. So we're happy to connect our members in that way.
Thank you so much, Whitney. And yes, Whitney and I are always happy to speak with anyone, come to an initial meeting, strategize with you. We love to do this. We'd love to see a housing coalition in every community. And I know on the North Shore and Merrimack Valley, you have many of them, but we'd love to see one in every place. So reach out to us, please. So I just want to give you a little bit of more data and context, and then we're going to jump into our breakout rooms. So this is polling from the COVID Community Data Lab, which Whitney had referenced in the beginning in our poll. I want to share with you here that there are some things we're seeing correlated with higher cases of COVID-19. This chart here is specifically showing cities with frontline workers and higher COVID rates. I wanted to highlight Lawrence as one of the communities that you all are working in. Lawrence has a high COVID-19 case rate of 415 per 10,000 residents. It has overcrowding of 6%, which is correlated with COVID-19 as opposed to density. I want to be clear on that. 49% of its residents are frontline workers, 86% are residents of color, and 24% are households in poverty. So when we're talking about communities that have been hardest hit by this pandemic, I think this information is really helpful. We need to direct our resources to the communities that are having those impacts. So this chart shows it pretty clearly. You know, Whitney shared at the beginning, 22% of renters and homeowners have not been able to continue to make their rental or mortgage payments. But if we break it down into income levels, it's a little bit starker. And so want to keep this in mind that lower income households are less likely to have been able to make their full housing payments. Some of them are making partial payments and many of them are making no payments at all. And what's been wonderful about the eviction moratorium is we've been able to stop people from being removed from their homes in the middle of this crisis when housing really is healthcare. But what we're looking towards now is what's going to happen after that. What's the crisis after the crisis when people are asked to pay that rent that they haven't been able to? Less than half of surveyed renters and homeowners could afford their current housing costs for the next 3 months. So there's another wave of crisis coming on the tail end of this. So keep that in mind. From the MAPC COVID-19 layoff housing gap report, this just puts into scale a little bit about what some of our local partners were talking about, the need for assistance. So even with the expanded CARES Act unemployment benefits, this is statewide. There's an estimated 7,800 renter households and 7,700 owner households that are having trouble paying for their basic needs. And we know that that's going to be even more. So there's a really large number here of what that would mean to keep them paying their rent and mortgage. And the situation, they've done an update to this report. I won't give you all the stats here, but the situation will get even worse in August after the expanded CARES Act unemployment benefits end, if people are still unable to work. Some things are opening up, but we know a lot of people still aren't able to. So there's an average monthly assistance of about $935 per renter household and $1,290 per owner household. That's a statewide assistance gap of $195 million monthly. So we are facing a big challenge here. Many of the partners are trying to fill those gaps as much as possible, but keep that in mind. So I want to get into these conversations, and in just a couple minutes, I'm going to send you into the breakout rooms. And thank you to some folks have been sharing their information locally. There are a lot of local emergency rental assistance programs that have started to bubble up in the wake of COVID-19. Whitney's going to share a document that shows where all of those are, but we're concerned again about, are people finding ways to access those funds? Are they getting to them? If they are getting to them, are they eligible? Are there people that are not eligible for them? Keeping in mind specifically undocumented immigrants, that's been a concern across the state, but particularly in this region. Are people eligible for the resources that are out there, and are there local assistance programs that could help fill those gaps? A couple of the partners mentioned the impacts on permitting and development moving forward. I'm excited to hear that there have been several of you who have been able to move projects forward, but there's also concerns about communities if they don't want to permit or they don't want to see development happening. This can be a moment where things are halted. It can be a little bit more difficult, making sure that meetings are happening, making sure that permit processes are moving forward. We know that we need more affordable housing now more than ever, and making sure that that is happening. So we want to hear from you if you're experiencing anything of that sort. Andrew in particular has mentioned special needs housing. So housing for seniors and homeless shelters and congregate housing have a whole new layer of complications on top of them in the wake of COVID-19. They've always had additional needs and special needs that we want to make sure that they are protected and safely housed, but how are we dealing with all of that in this moment? Raising the issue in your local communities of housing as healthcare. Always want to keep that on the radar, but more particularly right now. And how are we addressing racial equity through our work? Several of our speakers talked about zoning and initiatives and policies that we are trying to prioritize in this moment. How are we making sure that racial equity is part of our conversations? So what we're going to do, Whitney has shared a document in the chat. If you click on it, it'll tell you you can download a link and then post it into your browser. These are some discussion questions. I will acknowledge they're very broad. What we really want you to do in your small groups is start to have a conversation. Share the concerns that you're seeing. Are there gaps that you're seeing? Are the state and federal resources that we have been highlighting, are they helping your community as planned? Or are there additional funding sources, as Ryan mentioned, that you would like to see, or other policies that you'd like to see? And also thinking about beyond COVID-19, what will you need to be doing? What will we be needing to set up now in order to continue doing the work that we all know is so important? So when you go into your breakout rooms, so take a moment right now to download that document. I'm going to send you all into your breakout rooms now. You'll have about 15 minutes or so. If you could take notes, have someone in your group please take notes so that you can email those back to me. We will be compiling them and sharing our thoughts and using this to impact our work on the state, federal, and local levels. So I'm going to open those rooms now. And if you need any assistance while you're in the rooms, please, there's a button you can press to grab me. All right, here you go. Welcome back, everyone.
Hi.
Hello. So everyone, some folks will like cling to their last 60 seconds and finish their conversation.
Right.
So everyone should be back in just a little bit.
More time next time.
I know. Okay, well that's the next one of our next steps for sure.
Yeah.
We will continue. We always want to try to get more time for the conversations. All right, here comes everybody coming back in. And I already heard from the folks who joined me early, more time for conversation. I promise. We try. We want to make sure you get all the good information from our partners. But now that we're all back in, I just want to open it up. We've got a little bit of time before I promise to get you out of here. So anything that you guys were talking about in your small groups that you hadn't heard mentioned, or you think would be really important to raise in this forum that you think we need to be continuing on, please feel free to unmute yourself and share.
Mikey brought up a really good point. I was bringing up to him a conversation that we had in my local community previous group. We were talking about work access, remote work access for those individuals that are going to have a hard time going back into the field due to like health related risk or for childcare purposes. And how do we get more remote jobs for these folks within these communities? And he was talking about the challenges he's had with Wi-Fi and how that could be a barrier for a lot of these communities. But that's one thing that I would like to see more is work opportunities for individuals across the state where they're not putting themselves at risk due to available jobs that they can do at home, you know.
Yeah, and I think thank you also for raising the childcare issue. I think that had come up in our planning call, and I regret that I didn't mention it, but these are things that are going to be challenges for folks no matter what. Thank you, Erica. Other folks?
I'll put this out there. So the two things we talked about in our breakout session were, one, some of the challenges around like specialized housing for special needs populations, and how difficult that can be to keep financially solvent and operational. And so thinking about how we expand housing vouchers and housing assistance so that we really are serving our most vulnerable populations is one thing. And then rent control, guys, rent control. We are going to have to start engaging with this and tackle this at some point. And I think we really need to think about how we build a broad-based coalition around that doesn't just have the usual suspects that you would think would be on the side of rent control at the table. Maybe we call it rent regulation instead of rent control. Maybe we find some other word for it, but I do think we need to be able to make allies in a case for this, because the leaving housing to the capitalist markets is just not going to serve our country in the long. Leaving it solely to the capitalist markets is not going to serve our country in the long run.
Thanks, Jess. I really appreciate that comment. And it's hard not to have rent control come up in conversations these days. So I appreciate you bringing it up here as well. Other folks? I see Katie's unmuted. I'm going to start calling on people if I see them unmuted. Karen's unmuted. Did you want to share something?
I'll just briefly say that, of course, I asked this question, but we talked a lot about going forward in a post-COVID world, sort of how do we keep the stuff we're learning now alive in terms of future planning and zoning efforts in our community, and just how frustrating that was. And, you know, educating people to maybe take another look at their zoning in particular, and how that's working against and cause some of the problems that we're having now.
Yeah, I think I would echo that, and I would also echo, I think as I raised it, the role of planning and zoning in our racial equity framework. I think it's worth reevaluating all of that right now. Other folks have anything to share?
If I may, Vilma, you talked about in our group, which I thought was really interesting, sort of a local issue in Lawrence around vacancies, which I thought was really interesting. Did you want to talk or elevate that, Vilma?
Yeah, I think that Jess Andors spoke briefly about this. We have a very densely populated community, and housing production, it's, you know, it's fast and furious, but not keeping up with the demands for units. And then the other thing is that we do have affordable units that are coming online, but as you know, that usually goes with a lottery process. And so that leaves, you know, people that are needing, for instance, I was talking about the 2 temporary emergency shelters that we had to set up, 3 of them actually, for this area. And now we're depopulating the shelters, and we have nothing as far as housing options, particularly for people who are individuals, people who are chronically homeless, people who have very low income. And the apartments, first of all, they're very difficult to find apartments, and second, very expensive. We've seen an increase, we talked about this in the previous meeting, about the increase in the rental costs here. And we established a rental cost task force that was part of our housing production plan, and we have been meeting for a while. And actually in November of last year, held a rent and housing forum that really gave us a lot of information, but everything came at a halt, with March. And so we haven't been able to do much, but do, you know, the emergency response work that we're doing. But it's been a struggle to find housing, even though there's a lot of housing, our vacancy rates for rental housing are very low. And so this is and we have everything. We have housing choice. We have all these other 40Bs. We have all of these other zoning things that we've done and acquired, but I don't think that it keeps up with the population. Less than 7 mile radius, and, you know, 80,000 people packed here, but you know that that's more than that. So we're looking at people like at our shelter right now. We have elderly people with chronic health issues and no place to put them. We have young people who are here because they're back from Job Corps or back from schools, and they have no place to go. I mean, this is our situation right now. So come tomorrow, we close doors in one of our shelters, and we still have 9 people who we had to actually go up the ranks and get the senator's office to get in contact with some state agencies to pay attention. And then the Andover side is closing in 2 weeks, in a week and a half. And we still have probably 30 plus people there that we haven't been able to place. So this is a major issue for us. We have all the funding in the world, right? We have RAFT, we have now ESG, but now it doesn't matter, because housing stabilization may be a better use of the funds, but rapid rehousing may be an issue for us. So.
Thank you, Vilma. And yeah, thank you, Whitney, for raising that out of the group. And thank you, Vilma, for sharing. And I think it does raise up this issue of, you know, in COVID-19, we all pulled together, get everyone housed, get everyone in a shelter, but now what, right? The idea that you're saying depopulating these shelters but where are they going? The problem doesn't go away just because we've got COVID-19 under control. People still need a place to live. So thank you for elevating that. Other comments or questions or things that you are grappling with? We have just a few more minutes. Okay, you're quiet now. There's still plenty of time if you want to hop back in or share things in the chat. I'm gonna just go back to sharing my screen to close things up here. 1 second. Oops. I'm not gonna share my screen. Hang on. Is that working? Can folks see me on the discussion question screen? Sorry about this.
Yes.
Okay, great. We were talking about this, the feedback, like I want to see all your nods and I'm not seeing it. Okay. So before we go, we just want to remind you of ways to get engaged with us. I really appreciate you all being here today. We are going to think a little bit about how we can continue these conversations. And so when we do that, we have all of our CHAPA committees. We certainly would love for you all to engage with our CHAPA committees if you can. And there's a list of them here. We also would encourage you to attend CHAPA forums. We have several forums coming up in the summer and in the fall. They will be virtual, but you can find all of that on our website. And we also have our annual dinner. Save the date for October 21st. And we know it's always an exciting time to come together with everyone in the housing field, the affordable housing field. We will find a great way to do that even virtually. And lastly, please go to our website. There's lots of information there on how to sign up for events, sign up for our monthly housing briefs, join a committee, engage with us through the Municipal Engagement Initiative, Whitney and I. There's even a link where you can tell us where you live so we can connect you with additional folks who live in your community. And you can become a CHAPA member. So I just want to, before we go, say thank you again to our co-hosts. Thank you to Bank of America. Don't forget, as Whitney's saying in the chat, don't forget to save the chat by clicking the 3 little dots at the bottom of the chat function. And if you were taking notes in your breakout sessions, you can email them to me directly. And please feel free to reach out to any of us with any concerns or questions as we go forward. Thank you so much. Trying to see. Jenna, are you still recording?
It says it is, yeah.